それでは皆様、改めましておはようございます。
Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you once again for attending this session. My name once again is Itsuka Amano. I'll be the MC today. I would like to now announce the opening of the third day of the 5th Citizen Scientists International Symposium on Radiation Protection. Today's discussion is around discourses, law, and ethics after nuclear plant accidents. We have invited 6 experts for this session this morning. The co-chairs of this session is served by Professor Kyo Kageura from the Graduate School of Interdisciplinary and Information Sciences of the University of Tokyo, who specializes in linguistics. And I also would like to invite the co-chair, Mr. Shuji Shimizu from Fukushima University. The co-chairs, please. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I was not able to attend the past 2 days of symposium, so in a way, I just arrived this morning. My expertise is in finance, so in that sense, my study in regards to the Fukushima nuclear power plant is studying the system of the financial and budgetary system of the 3 laws regarding the power plant operation and finance. And because I happen to live in Fukushima, after the March 11th accident, I come to speak about, in various occasions, about the accident, and I'm often, as a result of that, criticized because at the time, after the accident, the prefecture has asked me to be the committee member of the Fukushima medical study, and I was appointed a very uncomfortable position of the chair, and I am serving as a co-chair today as well. But because I am an amateur when it comes to the radiation from the science or health issues, in that sense, I accepted to become the co-chair of this particular session, which is more focusing and centering around discourse, law, and ethics. Good morning. I will also be serving as chair. My name is Kyo Kageura from the University of Tokyo. As we begin today's session, I would like to summarize briefly yesterday's discussions and to clarify the connection between yesterday and today's discussion, and to tell you a bit about what will happen today. Regarding yesterday's discussion, very briefly, I'd like to summarize that we talked about the general perception of the health impact of radiation, the fact that there is no existence of 100 millisievert threshold, and that there is a health impact in line with the increase in the radiation dose. And it is adequate to think and consider that there is such an impact, and in that sense, it is important to look at the statistical reanalysis efforts that are undertaken that suggest to this fact, and there are many additional detailed studies undertaken proving the fact that actually the lowest minimum dosage of such that causes such impact is becoming lower and lower, and there are such statistical significances. And there is also the concrete issue of the health impact after the Fukushima Daiichi power plant accident, and there is clearly and very sadly the increase of the thyroid abnormalities that cannot be explained through screening or overdiagnosis. And this is already clear and evident from a scientific perspective. But despite that, there is a misconception that is still spreading in the society, and that is the basis of current government's politics. Why is this the case? Well, in order to answer this question, we need to not only discuss in the sphere of science, but we need to look towards the society. And that is what we would like to intend to do today in today's session. As we begin today's session, let us confirm about certain basic points that we need to share. I would like to for the sake of discussion, distinguish between the axis of perception and axis of the society. And we have no intention, however, to constrict the direction of the discussions that we will be having today. But I'd like to suggest some general directions in terms of the perception. The first theme is regarding science and the usage of science. Aihara-san was there yesterday and had a discussion with Professor Tsuda. They were talking about the issue of seeming extrapolation in an improper manner of science, the use of science by science. But what is the issue for Tsuda-san is the lack and deficiency of science itself, whereas Aihara-san's issue is the so-called over excess authority of so-called science in the science. I think I can summarize it in this way. And in that sense, without talking really about the deficiency of science itself, we are in a situation where there is a rampant, unreliable trust towards the science, and this is making the issues invisible. The second point I'd like to talk about is something that was mentioned by Professor Watanabe yesterday, and which is something that is invisible when you are in Fukushima. Well, this is kind of initially a geographical issue, but we need to look at how we should understand this from a social or societal perspective, especially considering the fact that there are already health effects that are observed in the north part of Ibaraki Prefecture. This is an important issue. The third issue that I'd like to talk about is the definition itself of the health impact. We are only focused on thyroid cancer and other type of cancers. The discussion even of the health impacts, physical health impacts in much wider area is completely missing. Furthermore, societal and psychological impacts, by definition, should be part of the health effect, according to the WHO as well. But that is not even talked about as a part of the health issue that is triggered by the nuclear power accident. In a way, these issues, like social and psychological issues, are considered to be the attributes of individuals. The word reputational damage is supported by such lack of perception and awareness of these wordings and use of words. The fourth point is temporal perception. There are various issues around here, but this is, for example, the issue of we were focusing only on pediatric thyroid cancer. How about adults? Now, that's about it in terms of the perception axis, and let us now look at the societal axis in terms of why we are in such situation today. The first point I'd like to talk about is the politics of the usage of words as represented by the so-called risk communication. And the second issue is the issue of responsibility and democracy. Gaston said something interesting. He said, I'm not saying this because I'm a leftist. I'm saying this because there's a legal basis. And this is not an abstract issue, but there are very concrete legal issues that should be placed as a core and important element when we think about this issue. The third point I'd like to talk about is really the basis of all, and the important question on what kind of society we'd like to create, with whom, how do we want to live, and what do we want to transmit to the next generation. That is the issue of ethics, and that should be the underlying overarching issue for all other questions. So in a very general manner, these are the themes that I'd like to focus around in today's discussion. Well, the first speaker is Ms. Olga KUCHINSKAYA, and she will be talking about the issues of invisibility because she has issued and wrote a book entitled Politics of Invisibility. She will be talking on the title of A Historical Perspective on Resetting Standards for Post-Chernobyl Radiation Protection in Belarus as a concrete theme. She will be connected on Skype. Olga?
Thank you very much. It's very nice being with us. Good evening again.
And thank you for having me.
Huh?
Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Just in case for people in the audience, and really thank you for having me. If you cannot hear me or understand a word I'm saying, wave at me, and that way I'll understand that
All right.
it's trouble.
Hey.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Thank you for introducing me.
Right. I've already introduced briefly just your name and your book. So could you start from introducing and start talking now? Thank you.
Okay. I'm a professor. I'm an assistant professor of communication at the University of Pittsburgh. And my background is in communication, but also in social studies of science and technology. And so the Chernobyl accident is said to offer a number of lessons for Fukushima, for sort of mitigating the consequences of Fukushima. And even though I think we should be very careful in making comparisons, really, really careful, I will talk about I will offer a bit of a historical perspective on sort of radiation protection after Chernobyl and sort of what we know about Chernobyl radiation effects. Can you all still hear me okay? Okay. Okay. So my presentation is based on my book, the title of which is The Politics of Invisibility, Public Knowledge about Radiation Health Effects After Chernobyl. And in essence, yes, that thing. In essence, the whole book is about how we come to know what we know about radiation health effects after Chernobyl. And everything started for me with, in 2003, with one strange kind of transformative question for me. Somebody asked me, hey, you were born in Belarus. What were the consequences of Chernobyl? Casually, in a kind of informal conversation. And I thought I would just, go and find out. Of course, I was that naive. So I discovered, and it was in 2003, I discovered online reports and press releases by the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. And the reports, in essence, claim that Chernobyl was a myth. In their very objective scientific voices, the reports argued that there was no evidence that Chernobyl radiation health effects had any significant that Chernobyl radiation had any significant effects on the affected populations, right? Among the general population, the only disease that was linked to radiation exposure was thyroid cancer in children, right? All other increases in health problems were blamed on radiophobia, so fear of radiation, stress from the collapse of the Soviet Union, and just general degradation of people's living conditions after the Soviet Union collapsed. So I was surprised because I kind of just simply assumed that Chernobyl was a massive accident, right? And then as a massive accident, I assumed that it had massive impacts, please don't go back to the previous slide. Too early. So I assumed that Chernobyl was a massive accident and that it had significant health effects. And but at the same time, the reports, those UN reports, sounded very convincing. So I was living in the US at the time, and I simply called some friends in Belarus saying, so hey, did Chernobyl have any health effects? And they all were telling me, sure, the numbers are out there, you just have to look them up. I assumed that I did not do enough research, and I went to find more research. So I went into databases. I was trying to find any kind of sort of more scientific information. And as a result of this, I found all kinds of conflicting views, right? And I became very uncertain. So I kind of thought that maybe this uncertainty is the property of the situation itself. Maybe it's the phenomenon, it's the problem of the accident. Except nobody besides me was uncertain. A lot of people were not very knowledgeable, but they all thought they knew what the effects were, or the scope of the effects. As I was trying to deal with this, I got another question. Here's what I didn't understand. People living in the affected areas, right? And I was thinking about Belarus, which is, the republic immediately to the north from Ukraine, right? So really affected by the fallout. And I was thinking it has these areas with significant contamination. People have been living in these areas for decades. Remember, I started thinking about it in 2003. So decades already. And I was thinking, but how do they know about radiation? And how do they know about the effects of radiation? Because I was thinking, radiation is completely imperceptible, right? And I'm sure a lot of you are too familiar with this, but if you go to contaminated areas, your bodily experience of it is not any different from experiencing any other area, right? I hate to say it, but if your room, this very beautiful room that you're all in now, was very contaminated now, you wouldn't know it because, it doesn't hurt, you cannot see radiation, you cannot smell it, it doesn't itch, nothing, right? And the effects of radiation, effects of, post-Chernobyl chronic exposure to so-called low doses, they're not immediately obvious, right? They are delayed and not specific to radiation. So my question was, if nothing about people's food screams out its danger, or like there's something about it, if there's nothing about the environment that, indicates danger, then how do people know? And subsequently, sort of it grew into this bigger question, how do we know what we know about the consequences of the Chernobyl accident? And what social mechanisms guarantee that this knowledge is adequate? And by adequate, I mean socially just. That people's past or present suffering is recognized, and that other people's future suffering is prevented. So the analysis in my book is based on the following insight. Because there is no direct experience of radiation, how radiation is represented matters. So representations of radiation, all kinds of representations of radiation, they all matter. What equipment is used, what scientific theories are used, what maps are showed, what visual images appear, what stories are told, all of it matters, right? And my argument is that different ways, and now the slide is good, different ways of representing radiation can make radiation and its health effects either observable and publicly visible, or they can make them unobservable and publicly non-existent. So in my book, I talk about how radiation is made visible, but also how it is made invisible, which is like strange double twist, right? Because radiation is already imperceptible to our unaided senses, but then how it's made publicly invisible. So much of my analysis focuses on this production of invisibility, which I understand as practices and conditions that limit public visibility of Chernobyl radiation and its health effects. So it's a question of what does not appear in public and what is displaced as an object of scientific research. It can simply not be studied or ignored because of particular methods, scientific methods used. Limiting public visibility of Chernobyl radiation prevents the construction of links between radiation and its health effects. As a result, what could, under other circumstances, possibly be connected as identified as Chernobyl radiation effects dissolves, it disappears into individual health problems of non-specific origin. Right. Somebody might get sick, but also might not know what they got sick from, and it never becomes a publicly recognized problem. In a way, what I'm talking about is the opposite of the discovery of microbes, right? Microbes, the invisible stuff that's everywhere in our life, they existed, right? They happily existed for a very long time, but except they were not recognized until Pasteur's experiments. They were not recognized as social agents, right? As something that we understand can cause some potential effects, right? And then, and now look at all the infrastructures, at all the antibacterial soap, and asking children to wash their hands and sterilizing equipment, right? So now the public visibility of microbes is constructed. So in some ways, you can think about the production of invisibility of radiation as the opposite of this process, right? So it can be made publicly invisible, unlike microbes that are very kind of recognized publicly. In practice, I see three dimensions that are particularly important to public visibility or invisibility of radiation and its effects, right? Three dimensions. One is where are the consequences of the accident, when do they appear, and how long they're going to last, right? So some kind of like spatial and temporal definition of where's radiation, where's the axis of radiation, and where are potential consequences, right? When and where. Second, what kind of consequences do we have? What is the nature of these consequences? And three, how does one observe these potential effects or consequences of the accident? What are the right tools and techniques that should be used to observe these consequences? right? So how we define the spatial and temporal scope, how we define the nature of effects, and what tools are deemed appropriate for making them observable. If we could possibly go to the slide with waves of invisibility now, that's, I can't tell if we're there yet. So, do you all see waves of invisibility? Somebody nod at me or? No? No? Please show the slide.
Can you see the slide?
They can see the slide?
Right, and is this the correct one for you?
It's waves of invisibility, right?
Yeah,
it
waves
has 5.
of invisibility. That's what you want, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So
You
we
guys
have.
do-
Oh, okay. Now Japanese and English are synchronized. Thank you. So could you start talking again? Sorry about that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So just to make sure, you all see waves of invisibility? Okay. All right.
Yes, perfect.
So approaches to Chernobyl and to post-Chernobyl radiation protection in Belarus were redefined several times under different political circumstances. And each time, the scope of the recognized radiological contamination and its effect, but also even just contamination itself, either shrank or expanded. And very kind of roughly, you can define, 4 or 5 periods. You can sort of map out how the sort of shrinking or expanding happened. And you can do it by looking at media coverage. State regulations have changed. So approaches to radiation protection changed. And finally, research institutes were also sort of affected. They were either, at some point they were established, and they were then sort of they were affected and changed. I'll talk about it a little later. So here's the thing: immediately after the accident, and this is common knowledge, right? So immediately after the accident, the Soviet government went out of its way minimizing the effects, right? The media did not mention the fallout on significant territories, right? And only talked about the zone of 10 kilometers around the Chernobyl power plant, and then 30 kilometers. And failed to mention, this massive fallout in other places. So, so the scope of the contamination was presented as temporary. It's going to be fixed very soon, but also very kind of narrowly localized. And top Soviet scientists blatantly denied any radiation danger. And they were aided by some UN experts who completely agreed with this estimate. Chernobyl visibility, you can say, erupted, increased dramatically about 3 years after the accident. 3 years after the accident. And in some ways, it was almost it came about with this top-down decision to, instead of having many separate decrees trying to deal with the accident, with radiation protection after the accident, to sort of come up with so-called the 5-year program of the elimination of the consequences of the Chernobyl accident, right? So Belarus at the time was a Soviet republic, and the Communist Party leadership decided that we should have this 5-year program of eliminating the consequences. What it did, it kind of created this little crack of an opening, sort of redefining Chernobyl, not as a very, very temporary problem, but as a beautiful long-term problem. These are the last years of the Soviet Union, right? So massive political transformation, glasnost, openness, more political freedom. This little thing led to a rupture, significantly more, and I will explain this rupture a little at the end. Scientists had a lot to do with this, so I want to return to this at the end. I just want to kind of describe the waves and then come back to this particular moment at the end. So this trying to come up with the 5-year program of eliminating the consequences created an opening, which kind of erupted into so much media discussion, a lot of media discussion. And a little while later, in Belarus, Chernobyl was talked about as a national disaster, right? See the dramatic transformation, as a catastrophe. It was even a national tragedy. It was now seen as a long time problem. And also now the media explicitly talked about this vast territories, close to 25% of the territory that was contaminated with long-living radionuclides. What I want to suggest, for just as kind of like in the brackets a little bit, that what is so unique about Chernobyl is not even this production of invisibility that I will turn to now, but this period, the period when visibility erupted, right? When Chernobyl was recognized as a massive disaster, when there was so much attention to it in the media, when laws were changed, radiation protection standards were redefined, four at least, major research institutes were established to study contamination, to study its health effects. Sort of researchers went into the field, all kinds of programs began. So, I have no idea.
For 5 minutes left, but you can, yeah.
Okay. All right. So, the greater recognition of the of this contamination and redefinition of the laws essentially meant greater economic costs of mitigating the accident. And Chernobyl is starting from about 92. Chernobyl was redefined as an economic catastrophe, not a nuclear catastrophe, or not just a nuclear catastrophe, but an economic catastrophe. In 92, Belarus was spending I think 12.6, it's in my book somewhere, 12.6% of its budget on Chernobyl. And part of the problem was that this redefinition of radiation protection standards was done in the hope that there would be international assistance. But the Soviet Union collapsed, so no assistance from the Soviet government, no international assistance, and already in '95, the government was talking about that it's impossible to relocate everybody from even from contaminated territories, and the state media talked about life overcame Chernobyl and life endures, right? So people persisted. Then starting from about let's put it at 98, the focus became very much on sort of creating the politics of sustainable development, which explicitly meant that contaminated areas need to be rehabilitated and life should be normal, right? Life should be made normal there. So, which affected, again, radiation protection standards. They were kind of reshuffled a little bit. And research institutes were renamed to take out radiation, restructured, relocated. so all kinds of things happened to national research on health effects. Essentially, the priority of research became not so much about health effects, but the focus was on sustainable development of the affected territories, right? So put them back to good use. And in 2013, some people from the government expressed in the media, they called it success in overcoming the consequences of the disaster. So, and of course, this economic reframing and then sustainable development reframing limited visibility of Chernobyl, was specifically sort of the attention to Chernobyl health effects. I know that I'm rapidly running out of time. So let me say something that I would have said, should I have like 3-4 minutes? Okay. What I wanted to say is this eruption of visibility, right, in sort of starting from 88, 89, had a lot to do with the disagreement between Soviet Moscow scientists and local Belarusian scientists. This was a politically motivated disagreement because Soviet scientists were essentially backing up the Soviet government, and then sort of they were part of the Soviet establishment. Local Belarusian scientists were fighting against what they saw as minimizing the consequences of Chernobyl. They were trying to reveal the truth. They made a lot of Chernobyl documents declassified, right? So they became available. And the disagreement had to do with the concept for radiation protection. So this foundation for the 5-year program. What the Soviet scientists proposed was the so-called infamous the concept of safe living in the affected territories, right? That essentially said that they said the maximum dose, I think it was 350 millisieverts for a lifetime of 70 years. According to Belarusian scientists, this was a methodological way to make radiation health effects invisible. From the perspective of Soviet scientists, no radiation protection measures were essentially necessary, definitely no relocation. From the perspective of Belarusian scientists, what it does is it's a good office concept that is completely sort of unapplicable in real life because it's difficult to measure people's annual doses. Not at the time, not with the equipment available. So what they tried to do is come up with a concept of radiation protection that was applicable in real life under the existing technological circumstances, right? So they lowered the threshold, but also used multiple criteria and criteria that could be used in real life. And they created, zoning in Belarus and then maps of radiological contamination. Later, when the authorities again tried to sort of minimize the visibility of Chernobyl, they tried to roll back this kind of radiation protection concept and again make it sort of based on theoretical estimates as opposed to sort of more on empirical measurements. All right. What I meant to say really is that radiation and its health effects can be made visible, but they can also be made publicly invisible. Right? And after Chernobyl, you see these periods of visibility and invisibility. This is all in my book. What is not in my book and what I learned personally, and I should probably emphasize more in the book, is that I don't think that no scientific evidence is a very good argument. The question is, what guarantees that should there be effects, right? That these effects would be reflected in studies and in data. And not just ignored. And I think that knowledge production and adequate radiation protection, that they require transparency, they require openness and public scrutiny. And as far as radiation protection is concerned, the first step is probably making equipment as widely available as possible. So producing as much empirical data as possible, as opposed to theoretical estimates kind of done somewhere based on some models. All right, thank you so much, and I apologize for the, thank you.
Thank you very much for your clear and exciting presentation. Thank you very much. We can take the short questions mainly for factual clarifications, if you have any. 事実関係について はっきりさせたい。
In order to clarify the simple and basic questions, you can raise those questions. Just confirmatory questions. Yes, as to the waves of invisibility and visibility slide at the very end of this slide, can you see the last point of the waves of invisibility and visibility slide? You said in the last bullet point, the near complete disappearance 2005. However, after this, almost 10 years have passed. And therefore, the meaning of disappearance, it can be translated into the re-invisibility. Therefore, can you describe what happened after the disappearance and what do you mean by saying disappearance?
This is a little bit of a complex question. You probably don't realize how complex this is. My focus was on radiation health effects, right? I specifically wanted to know what we know about radiation health effects, right? I was less interested in kind of agricultural production on contaminated territories, right? Sort of the practical aspects. There's a lot besides radiation health effects, and I was less focused on our knowledge about that. So what I mean is simultaneously, the Belarusian government has done a lot in terms of radiation protection. Really, their efforts have been unparalleled. But the public visibility, right, sort of what is acknowledged as effects of Chernobyl and where contaminated areas, right, so they have shrunk and the effects have pretty much vanished. It's nothing except for maybe thyroid cancer in children. So there's simultaneously, there are infrastructures for radiation protection, and I believe now, because I published the book and I sort of stopped doing this research. The book came out last year. And state officials say that they've overcome eliminated the consequences. Here's how I can put it very simply. When I was doing interviews, somebody told me, and that was in 2006 or 2005. Somebody told me that that the contaminated area used to be big, but now it's about the size of an airport. So it is my perception that it's shrinking further, right? Though it has shrunk to, I don't know, half of an airport, less. So it's not recognized. There's production. People leave that it's rehabilitated. There's no attention to radiation issues. There's very little attention to radiation issues. That's what I meant. That's all.
Right. Although, okay, very quick, short question, please.
Fascinating research presentation. My name is Reiko Hasegawa. I'm working as a research fellow at Sciences Po Paris. And my research focus is on the displacement of the population after the accident. And I was wondering, in Chernobyl, although I try to really study for that phenomenon after Chernobyl, it's quite difficult. Maybe it's a language barrier as well, but it's difficult for me to really have an overall picture. And of course, my question has to be short. So I just want to ask you about the displacement of the population. When the population were relocated, what kind of compensation or what kind of assistance the government had offered to the population? Thank you.
So this is again a very complex question, and not all of it is. I would not be able to speak to all of it, but I would recommend sort of the question of compensation, right? Monetary compensation for the affected populations. It was perhaps, this is my personal opinion, right? This is my subjective opinion now. It was probably more pronounced in Ukraine and less pronounced in Belarus, right? And because areas of Belarus so some parts of Belarus, they sort of further north, Mogilov areas, they had significant contamination spots, really sort of massive contamination spots, but they were relocated very late, so 4 years after the accident. And there were other areas that were relocated and then relocated again. And there were populations that went back, so some people went back. There are some towns that you can see that a lot of it was kind of repopulated by other people, sort of refugees from other areas, like maybe not that much, but sort of there was an influx of other populations. This is a very, very, very complex question. Very complex question, but I would mention Adriana Petrina's book, Life Exposed, but except she speaks to the Ukrainian part of it. Sorry, that's a non-answer to the question.
はい、ありがとうございます。他にもご質問。
Thank you very much, and I believe many of the audience want to raise questions. However, because time is running out, therefore I have to conclude your session. Thank you again, Olga-san.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are you staying with us?
I will for a while.
All right, that's great.